right. Well, good morning, Sangha. Great to see everybody today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Chris Fisher. I am a teacher at Mount Adams Buddhist Temple, and I live in Pasco, Washington. So it's great to see my fellow dry lander, dry side of the mountains. Tiffany came in just a few minutes ago. So, in our land of no trees and sagebrush over here. So it's good to see everybody this morning. Sharona, I don't want Sharona to label me, but I think this talk is going to be about Buddhism and how we relate to war. I think that is heavy on a lot of our minds. I'll apologize in advance to some of our evening Sangha members who have heard a version of this over the last couple of weeks. I'm kind of combining our Wednesday night Dharma talks that I've given over the last couple of weeks, but they really seem to fit together and be topical. So Kate and Valerie and Sharona and Tam. I don't think Claudia's here this morning. I haven't seen her name on the screen, but you guys are getting a little bit of a double up this morning. But glad that everybody's here, and we're gonna talk about how should we relate to these situations, these big situations, the big events, the bombs that are dropping, the people who are dying, the families who are grieving and mourning, and how all that should happen for us. Tam, did you have a question or?
Don't mind me, I'm having internet issues.
Okay. Okay. Saw your hand go up. So, all right. Well, first of all, I wanted to recommend a book that I've been reading. I've almost finished, and I'll throw the title in the chat. But it's Buddhism: A Journey Through History by Donald Lopez, and my screen's blurring it a little bit, but I've got the link. The Amazon link here, so you can find the title and then get it from your favorite bookstore if you're interested. This is a book I've been looking for a long time. I didn't know existed. It's a scholarly work. He's a professor at the University of Michigan, I believe, of Buddhist studies or Asian studies, something like that. But he's written several books on Buddhism, and of course I love history, so this was a great find for me, but it's extremely well written, even though it's written by a scholar, not necessarily a practitioner or a monk or a teacher. But it's the language of it is well done, and it's organized in a way that's not chronological. It's actually organized by topic and by alphabetically. So it goes through. It starts with, where's the table of contents here? It starts with, a chapter. Each chapter is about 10 to 15 pages, and it starts with a apocalypse, and then art, and then goes into the Buddhist canon and the council, the history of Buddhism's encounters with other places, goes into food, as we go down the alphabetical order, incarnation, Buddhist law, orthodoxy, you get down into pilgrimage, and science and self and all of these different topics that he covers historically. And it was actually nominated for a Pulitzer Prize in 2024, I believe. So highly recommend. But I want to talk about the chapter, which I actually just finished about a week ago, which is on war, which is one of the last chapters here. And he goes through and talks about several different Buddhist groups. I'll stop holding this up now. He goes through and he talks about several different Buddhist groups that were affected by war, and kind of highlights some of that. Buddhism, of course, is a world religion and cannot escape the events of the world. And so it's been caught in all sorts of conflicts and disasters and genocides and persecutions and battles and all kinds of things. And so, he highlights, for example, a group of Mongols who end up in Russia. They end up fighting, in the Russian Revolution on the Tsar's side. And some of those refugees end up coming over and establishing a Tibetan center even though they're Mongolian, they practice Vajrayana Tibetan Buddhism, and they end up establishing a Tibetan center in New Jersey, which trains, Robert Thurman, for example, learned there. He gets into a little bit on the Sohei, or the warrior monks in Japan. These huge armies of monks, warrior monks, which seems so antithetical to what I picture Buddhism as, this religion of peace and metta, loving kindness, and equanimity, and quiet meditation. But there were thousands and thousands of these warrior monks, mercenary monks, that lived in these temples in Japan, and they were, depending on your perspective, they were helpful in certain battles, and they were quite a nuisance for the Central Powers, and for different factions and different samurai lords and all that kind of stuff, until most of them were eventually wiped out in the Sengoku period. He also briefly touches on the Zen priests in Japan, again urging war in World War II, which has been written about in a couple of books pretty famously. So it's a wide-ranging topic, and Buddhism cannot escape war. Moving away from the book a little bit, I'm going to come back to it and read a selection from it a little bit later, and talk about the Buddha and his interactions with war during his time. He could not escape these ideas of war. But we also have been recently talking about India and Sri Lanka. I saw Mary Ellen come in. I can't see everybody on my screen now. I think Mary Ellen was still in here. Valerie, of course, joined us today, and they both recently returned from Sri Lanka. Valerie was great enough to give us kind of a rundown of her trip a few weeks ago on the Wednesday night Dharma talk, and then we talked about the Emperor Ashoka, who was a historical emperor of India in the Mauryan Empire. And Ashoka lived about 200 BC, and he has quite a story dealing with war. And I think we can learn something from Ashoka's story. Ashoka was one of, I think, 100 sons of the previous king, and the stories go that he was a pretty brutal guy. A young man, a teenager in his 20s, murdered many of his brothers, had many of them killed, brothers, stepbrothers, half-brothers, had many of them killed, assassinated, to kind of work his way up to the top and claim rulership of the Mauryan Empire. The Mauryan Empire, by the way, was one of the first kind of all-encompassing empires in Indian history, and especially in the area of the Ganges, which the Buddha had previously lived. It was about 200 years or so after the historical Buddha's death that Ashoka lived. So he's inheriting a fairly extensive empire. And Ashoka, once he gains power, continues to rule brutally. He kills his enemies. He keeps great armies that attack anybody that stands in his way. Famously, in his capital, there are torture pits that he would throw enemies and anybody that he didn't like, would throw them down into these horrible torture pits, and you can only imagine what kind of suffering and sorrow would be going on in these areas, and what Ashoka was capable of. There's a great story of Ashoka who turned his life around, turned his philosophy around. They were battling the last major neighbor to defeat, and that was the Kalingas. The people were called the Kalingas, and Ashoka's army and the Kalinga army was a huge, massive battle, and thousands and thousands and thousands died. Tens of thousands died. We don't know the numbers back in ancient times quite as well. The Indians were not as thorough as the Greeks were. Of course, the Greeks and the Romans exaggerated their numbers, but we at least can get a little bit better idea. But according to the stories, it was a massive battle with huge casualties on both sides. But Ashoka's army, in the end, basically wiped out the Kalingas and killed many civilians as well. Just a horrible, brutal affair. And there's the story that kind of turns Ashoka is he's walking the battlefield after his great victory. And he sees a Buddhist monk walking through the battlefield, and the monk is caring for the dead, caring for the dying, trying to assist in any way that he can. And Ashoka kind of breaks down and begins to sob and realize the amount of destruction that he caused. And so Ashoka converts to Buddhism. He becomes a Buddhist and starts to transform his empire into the first Buddhist empire. And he passes laws that are following the Dharma for human treatment. His laws are reminiscent of the UN's Declaration of Human Rights in a lot of ways. It's a precursor to that. They establish animal hospitals and shelters for animals. Compassion doesn't just extend to humans, but to other beings that may be suffering as well. And Ashoka, we know a lot about this because Ashoka carved all these decrees in stone tablets, and these tablets have been found and studied. There are, I believe, several hundred of these tablets that have been found that kind of list his laws, tell his story, tell stories about the Buddha, and the use of compassion, and why his empire changed the way that it operated from this brutal empire to a much more compassionate and a holistic way of ruling. Now, of course, we don't know for sure how much of this was propaganda versus how much of this was true. We have these inscriptions. We have some evidence that things did change. We have things that were written down. But Ashoka was highly thought of and has been highly thought of in Buddhism for his ability to kind of turn his life and outlook around by finding the Dharma and overcoming a measure of his suffering. Of course, we were talking about Ashoka later sends his sons and daughter to Sri Lanka, and they bring, where Valerie and Mary Ellen were recently vacationing and got to visit, and they bring the Dharma to Sri Lanka. And then they also his daughter brings a sapling of the Bodhi tree, which is still growing in Sri Lanka, in a temple in Sri Lanka. It's one of the holiest sites on that island, and anywhere in Buddhism is a sapling of the original Bodhi tree that's still growing in Sri Lanka. And then, of course, if you look at the Indian flag today, the wheel at the center of the flag, which was chosen after the independence was gained by the British, is Ashoka's wheel. And it's the wheel of law and the wheel of compassionate law that was passed and chosen as kind of an ideal for the Indian state, the modern Indian state, to aspire to, which Ashoka modeled after the Dharma and after Buddhist teachings. And so you can kind of see how war can be transforming in that way, that it's all suffering. It can all but it can all be transformed with the Dharma. So just another example that we've been talking about of how people have been affected by war. But I want to go back to this book and read a little bit, just a short couple of paragraphs, where the Buddha was in conflict. And the Buddha was in the middle of a war. And so he says, Donald Lopez writes here in his chapter on war, he says, warfare does not figure prominently in the story of the Buddha, apart from one famous incident. One of the Buddha's most loyal patrons was King Prasenajit of Kosala. However, the Buddha's own Sakya clan looked down on him, sending a low-caste servant girl when he requested a bride, telling the king that she was from a noble family. When their sons, Varudaka, later came to the Sakya capital, he learned of their deceit and swore revenge. When his father died and Varudaka became king, he immediately led his army to destroy the Sakya clan. However, as he approached the city, he saw the Buddha seated under a tree and turned back. This occurred on 3 different occasions. The Buddha did not appear the 4th time, explaining that he could not prevent his clan from suffering the karmic result of poisoning a river in a previous life. During the battle, the Sakyans, not wishing to kill, intentionally misfired their arrows and were massacred. Varudaka and his troops suffered the effect of their murder almost immediately, drowning when a flood swept through the riverbed where they were sleeping that night. If there is a lesson to be learned from this story, it is that the law of karma is inexorable. Even the Buddha cannot prevent past deeds from having their effects. Such a doctrine provides an explanation of why wars are won and lost, who is victorious and who is vanquished. It seems predestined. As we will see in the examples that follow, this did not prevent Buddhists from waging war. It simply provided them with an explanation for the eventual outcome. Okay, so he emphasizes the karmic consequences here, which is interesting. I would emphasize just the Buddha's participation in these events. We cannot escape. We cannot escape these events. I often think about, we have venerable monks in our Zoom room this morning and at their temples, and they're carrying on, and we as a Sangha, we are carrying on a tradition that goes back 2,500 years. And it's one of the oldest human traditions. It has survived so much upheaval and monks have continued to practice, and nuns have continued to practice, and the Sangha has continued to practice. But the Buddha lived through these things. He saw his homeland destroyed, his people massacred, and he tried to stop it, not by fighting. He didn't draw a sword, but he did what he knows how to do. He sat under a tree and put his body in the way of the oncoming attack. And it worked. It worked for several times until it didn't. And then his people were massacred. And so we can explain that through karmic results, but we can also notice that the Buddha, as a human, lived and died and suffered even after his enlightenment, and went through real human things. That's one of my favorite parts of Old Path White Clouds, which is the Thich Nhat Hanh biography of the Buddha that we like to recommend in our Sangha, and as we should. It's a phenomenal book. If you haven't read it, I'm sure many of us have been recommended that and have picked that up. But we like to recommend that because I feel like it really shows a human side to the Buddha. There are assassination attempts. There are attempts to slander him and, put women close by and have women invent stories about him to slander the Sangha. And Devadatta tries to pull the Sangha apart, and the Buddha has to deal with a schism, from his cousin, and so there's all of these very human events. And so I think it's just a reminder, as we're in the midst of war now again, I say, because this feels very familiar to events that we've lived before in the United States and we've been a part of. And I also acknowledge that we're insulated from that. We're a continent away from most of this, or 2 continents away, and an ocean on either side of us that insulates us from a lot of these things. And so, how do we deal with that if we can't put our bodies directly under a tree and stop the bombs? So I have a recommendation, or a few recommendations. Going back to, I think Terry mentioned this in his check-in. Where can we start? What can we do? What can we do here with this? So In education, we always talk about. I'm a middle school teacher. For those of you who don't know me, and I we always talk about in education you can't pour from an empty cup, and it's easy to get burned out. And so don't burn yourself out. Try to find some equanimity in your life. And for most of us, I think we've found a piece of that, at least with our meditation practice. And so, sit, be mindful, be present. It's great to hear stories of people taking a walk. The first walk without snow. Of course, I haven't had a walk in the snow, this year in Washington State, at least on my side of the mountains. But it's great to hear that's a milestone over in Sweden, that we get our first walk without the snow. So be mindful, be present, in your day-to-day life. I think it all starts there. And then just point you to the Eightfold Path and right intention. What is your intention with life? What are we trying to do? Are we like Ashoka at the beginning of his reign, or trying to gain power? Are we willing to claw over people and do anything? Or is our intention to live in a more peaceful, compassionate world? And if that intention is there and it's strong, your actions, your speech, your livelihood, the things are going to manifest their way out from that. The tangible parts of the Eightfold Path are going to manifest their way out from that Eightfold Path. Not saying that manifestation is necessarily what I'm talking about there, but it's good. If our intentions are good, the likelihood is that good is going to come from that. And so just be mindful also of your intentions and what you're putting out into the world, and how you're responding to misinformation, conflicting views, and those kinds of things. And what are your intentions with those? And lastly, I can't recommend it enough, but metta practice, compassion practice, knowing that we are all connected, that we are all interdependent. We have all co-arisen through causes and conditions beyond our control, and seeing through that and seeing that we are all interconnected in that way, and we're interconnected with everything on this planet. And the bombs that we're firing are also the bombs that are dropping on us, and the bombs that are dropping on other people are also being fired by them. So it's just noticing that and being aware of that and having compassion. And we can only have compassion for the people in our near circle, but then knowing that our circle extends out to the whole planet. So practicing with our actions and our compassion to the people nearest to us. And if you're looking for more on some of these kinds of things, Thich Nhat Hanh has kind of developed this idea of socially engaged Buddhism, which is something that I highly recommend to look into or to check out some of the ideas with that. How can we be practicing? How can we be solid with ourselves, but then also be able to engage with the world in a socially conscious way, in a helpful way, doing the most good that we can. So that's my offering this morning for the Sangha. So again, apologize to my evening crew. You've heard similar things, but I appreciate the time and attention to that, and encourage you to stick with your practices.
Thank you, Reverend Chris. How lovely. Could we end the recording?